Oh, no, wait, oops, actually, I just had gumbo for dinner. So, hello, everybody. Welcome. I think we're online. It's In Between the Pages with James Lott Jr. I am James Lott Jr. I think I'm James Lott Jr. We're going to make sure that the chat room is open. If you want to come into the chat, the water's fine. Thank you for joining us tonight on this 2.
Yeah.
I love it. It's 2. At 2:22 today, I made a big wish, but on purpose. So we'll see what comes true. Welcome to the show. I'm James Lott Jr., of course, JLJMedia. And I'm talking to two of my biggest shows I have on my network that I'm just like, wow, I have over 45 shows, and these two do very well, and they're very different, but tackle a similar genre of a genre. So from Forgotten Hollywood and from Some Like a Classic, it is Doug Hess and Tami Goveia. Like, hello, you guys.
Hi.
Hello, James.
So before I get started, hello, Steven Sorrentino. Hello, Steven Sorrentino. Hi, I love you. So we at JLJ Media have over 45 shows, audio and video. So anywhere you listen to audio dramas or anything, or audio podcasts, from Star Wars to soaps to left-handedness, everything, and to old Hollywood, go anywhere. Wherever you go to your podcast, go to Spotify or Apple or Google or iHeartRadio, wherever. Find the shows, find JLJ Media. We are there. And of course, the granddaddy of them all is the YouTube channel. Here on YouTube, under JLJ Media, there's a little thing down here somewhere. It says subscribe. Hit it. Be kind, rewind. Thank you. Okay, so welcome to the show. Now, what's very interesting is you both came to me around the same time with different concepts, but about classic Hollywood. So I want to ask, before we get into how successful these shows have been on, everything I do all that, I want to go to you, Tami, first. What is it that you like about classic Hollywood in general? Because you're drawn to it. And so what is it about classic Hollywood you like?
Gosh, there's so many dynamics and layers to why is a fan a fan. Oftentimes it's the same relationship as music. It's like, oh my God, I remember seeing that movie during this time, or I remember seeing that film when this was happening in my life. And that seems to be really strong and prevalent with classic film. And I love that, it might sound weird, but I think classic film folks will get it. There's a sound to the movies, not just the music, but there's a sound to the film. You could have it playing on TV, and I'll know, like, okay, this is a classic film playing, right, Doug?
I agree. No, you're right on.
Yeah, there's a sound to it, and the sound soothes me. And there's a big thing about nostalgia. I mean, I didn't grow up in the 40s, the 30s and 40s and 50s or 60s, but I just think hearkening back to the way film was made during these different decades fascinates me. It's a reflection of the culture at the time. It's a historical, accurate reflection of what was seen through the lens of America at the time. So yeah, there's just all these different things, but at the end of the day, it just makes me feel good.
Tami, you said something that two things hit me. One, just side with music, when you play vinyl, it's vinyl. You do, the pops and cracks and crackles, it's vinyl. I have a record player over here, and I put on my records. There's a difference than putting on Spotify. There is a difference.
Absolutely, or even when CDs came out.
Yes, it's true. You're right. When you said, I never thought before you said that. Second thing it made me think of was, I think I said this to you not so long ago on one of our other shows. I was saying, during the holidays, I had they were doing an Elvis movie fest on one of these stations, one of these channels, and Blue Hawaii was on.
Oh yeah,
and which there's some horribly racist stuff in there. But anyway, the point is, love the music, I love the stuff. But it was on the back. I had it on the background. I was doing other stuff. I was laying on my bed reading this other stuff. I was comforted by it. You're right. There's a set. It wasn't a regular show. I knew it was a '60s movie. It had that sheen. It had the fake sets. All that stuff was very of that time period of that ilk. I felt warm. It felt even when I do the Twilight Zone marathons, like on Christmas or New Year's Eve, they always play them. New Year's Day, they always play them. Not the new ones. Like I say this in every show. Not the newer ones from the '90s. Those were horrible. I meant the original Rod Serling ones. Each one, it's just something about it. It just makes you feel comfortable. Like I know how they all turn out. They're all effed up and everything. But I know they're gonna turn out. But there's something comforting of having them on the screen, kind of in the background while I'm doing other stuff. I knew that before, Tammy. You said that. Maybe I guess it's the sound. Maybe it's the sound for me too, man. I just wow. I never thought before. So Doug, you came to me too at the same time about classic films. So why do you like classic film?
Well, I think for a lot of the same reasons Tammy has already mentioned. Number one is the nostalgia. I remember growing up at my grandparents' house, going over there on weekends and stuff and watching the old movies. And so it is that kind of comfort that you were talking about, bringing back that nostalgia. But a couple other reasons that I really like the classics is, number one, take The Wizard of Oz in 1939. They were cutting edge technology, trying to make that tornado, and they didn't have the green screens and all this technology. And then you look back and you go, yeah, it's fake, but yet it's believable too. And so I think that's one area. Another area why I like the classics is you have to study the past, because a lot of the stuff that we're seeing today, and I talked about this on another show that James and I were on, take A Star Is Born. It's been made 4 times, but a lot of this generation thinks it's original. That Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga is original. And you go, no, Judy Garland was in it, and, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, 4 times. Or you look at Barbara Streisand and, yes, thank you. But you also look at films like You Got Mail with Tom Hanks. You have to go way back to Jimmy Stewart in The Shop Around the Corner, is where that was originally done in the 1940s. Frank Morgan was in that as well. So it's that history and knowing that some of the things that we're seeing today is actually remakes from 75, 80 years ago. And it's really not new. And to really appreciate that, I think you have to study the classics in terms of that.
It's funny seeing Cyrano being remade again, seeing Big Beth on Apple TV, being made again.
And then there are some things that just shouldn't be remade, like Sabrina.
Right.
That was a catastrophe.
Yes.
I don't know how anyone in the room said, "Oh yeah, this is going to be a great idea." It doesn't matter if it's Harrison Ford.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's Greg Kinnear.
Right.
It's leave it alone.
Now, let me ask you a question, because you guys may know this. Was Sleepers in Seattle an update of something? Or no? Because someone was saying, I remember reading somewhere something about it happened one night, later it was something else related to something else later. But I can't remember. So I don't know. I'll have to look it up somewhere. I'm looking up, but it's like someone was like saying maybe it's a similar concept to something that was on before. I mean, that's one of those things. It's probably hardly any concepts are new anymore. Let's get real.
Yes.
They're all derivative of something that's been on before. Obviously, we have like over a century and a half of movies at this point. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, they're all the same tropes are there. But I always thought that was another one they were saying that's a update of something. But I just saw Cyrano again going, they've done that movie a million times. Robin Hood's been done a million times. All these things have been done over the years. So you're right. The newer generations go, oh, this is new. Okay. No, it's not new. No. Vampire movies been around for years. Was not the first.
Too, what's fascinating about classic film is that there's so many fantastic genres that came out of classic film. I mean, you had noir, you had, the new wave film, the cinema, that you just don't see nowadays. Like, okay, you have action films, you have rom-coms, but they're not art. They're not, what's the term? Revolutionizing. I mean, these are revolutionizing ways of filmmaking. And you just don't see that anymore.
like you said, back then you had to make up things. And I was looking at, we were talking about Psycho, another show, how Psycho was, well, at first the shower scene, literally, you just see the knife, you see a silhouette, you see the blood going in the drain. Like there were so many techniques they used that weren't just so overt that you see later, where it's like you just see the thing getting chopped up and stabbed to death. And we saw killings in the movie, but just like that was something that was very, and even birds, and they had interesting angles.
Can we just give some trivia? And I know, Doug, I know you know this. You know what was more shocking than Janet Leigh getting killed like that?
Well,
was Janet Leigh getting killed.
yeah.
No, literally, because she was a star.
She's a star.
Right.
And so from an audience's perspective, Janet Leigh is expected to be there from the beginning to the end.
Right.
Killing her off in the beginning of the film was unheard of. You had people in the audience literally going,
Yep. Oh, it's like that. Well, actually, it makes sense. That makes sense. I didn't care for the scene by scene remake that was done years later. That was weird. Really weird. Don't mess with my Hitchcock stuff. Don't mess with them. I heard he was horrible to his leading women. That's another story. I love all his films. But so you both are aware of TCM, of course. That's Turner Movie Classics. That's been around for a long time, and they're known for the presentation side of classic film. I grew up with Elvira Misses the Dark, doing the bad B and C and grade Z horror films. I mean, like E, X, Y. I mean, the films. I had a hippie mother, so we watched all of that craziness and all these weird ass movies that were kind of crazy from the 50s, 60s. Just like you can see the staff, the boom mics, that kind of stuff. Love it. Love it. We love it. So for both of you guys, there's an audience, isn't there? We're seeing this with your shows. There is an audience that's connected to TMC. They're connected to this type of movie history, aren't they? Doug, how'd you go first?
No, I think you're exactly right. And I think a lot of it is the nostalgia because people remember. I'll tell you a great story, or I don't know if it's a great story, but I'll tell you a quick story.
Judge an ass. Okay, just kidding. Go ahead.
So we were at my son's Christmas football celebration. And so the football coach, I didn't realize, was a huge classic film buff, especially around the holidays, because it reminded him of his mother and his grandmother growing up watching that. And so it was really funny. So they had like 4 or 5 different gifts, and they said, we're going to do Christmas trivia. Well, he didn't realize that I was doing a podcast on classic films. So like the first 4 questions that were asked, nobody knew. And I'm like, that was Barbara Stanwyck, or this was this or that. And they finally cut me off and said, you're no longer allowed to answer any more questions. But the point is, it was because people want that nostalgia. They want to reconnect with their past, especially around the holidays. I think is a big time around Christmas, etc. They just want to connect with the past. The other thing is I've turned my wife and our 2 boys onto old films too, because they have I think certain generations have a stigma in their mind that old films are black and white, they're boring, there's no excitement, there's nothing to it. And then when they sit down and actually watch, they just can't believe that there's great acting that's going on there. There's great scripts, and they didn't have a lot to work with, and they're turning something from nothing into some hits out there. So I think it's a little bit of everything.
Well, the thing. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, to your point, Doug, when you look back and you say they didn't have the special effects, they didn't have blah blah blah, it boils down to people having conversations.
Correct.
It boils down to characters and the strength of writers and the power of writers back then. And writers were given power. And there was a lot of pressure.
Yes.
A lot of pressure, because they weren't just making, one film every couple of years. They were like cranking it out. There's the art of conversation, which is kind of leans into hosting and why we do what we do, because we love having these kinds of conversations.
Completely. And I tell people, I've turned my kids on to some older movies growing up. I'm like, you understand what you're seeing today on the soaps? Watch All About Eve. Watch Mildred Pierce. There's certain imitation of life. There's a bunch of things you can watch that are very soap filled and dramatic and bitchy and sassy. There's actions like Norma Shear in them who are great in these films. I mean, you have no idea. Like, you hear about Betty Davis, you hear about Joan Crawford, you hear about these names that are kind of now caricatures of themselves in some cities, some things. But they were actually great actresses who had these amazing movies that you would totally could relate to if you're watching Desperate Housewives or General Hospital, or like they can't. This is where they kind of started, folks. This is where this was pre all that stuff, and they really are entertaining. The dialogues. I mean, the Thin Man series is my favorite series of all time. I mean, they're fun, and the woman gets equal, and she gets equal billing. She's like, I mean, Myrna Loy is like equal billing. She's, I mean, they were great together. I mean, it's just like, you don't understand. And I grew up with the old TV shows like Burns and Allen and all those. I grew up with those because that's all I had. I mean, I was a kid, we only had 3 channels, and then we had a channel that was, showed all these movies at night in syndication. And so people don't realize there was a lot of gold in them hills. I mean, that's still being mined today. I mean, they just are. And Tami, you're a soap watcher. So am I saying anything out of turn, or is it? I mean, does this sound kind of similar also?
No, I mean, people bag on the soaps, but Dynasty had great ratings.
Mm-hmm. Sure did.
Falcon Crest had great ratings. Those are all soap operas. They were just at night.
Right.
They were.
Yeah. It had better budgets.
Yeah. Films 55555 says nothing compares to old films. The older screwball comedies are the best. Bring It Up, Baby is the line in the first show. Isn't that Katharine Hepburn in that one? Yeah.
And Cary Grant.
Cary Grant.
And a tiger or something. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something like that. But no, I mean, Judy Holliday, of course, won for Born Yesterday. She won the Oscar for Best Actress. Because a lot of times, why? I want to ask you about this. I want to ask you about it because you both are old. Why do you think comedies, especially back then, didn't really win Oscars? A few more have done now. But back then, was it just politics? Was it like you just feel like it's just the dramatic films were always featured? Or why didn't they win more Oscars, you think? There were some great comedies that were really well acted back in the day. I mean, they were wonderful. Tami, any thoughts?
I think it was politics. I mean, I think from day one, dramatic acting was just taken more seriously. And for some reason, people thought it was harder, which it's not. Comedy is a million times harder to do and to do it well. Yes. So yeah, I think it was, fighting the stigma and which continues to this day.
That's true. Doug, what do you think?
No, I think Tami's spot on that. Is that the Academy Awards, the Oscars, were looked at more as a serious token for serious work. And again, I'm not saying that comedy isn't serious work and hard, like Tami said, but it's that persona that dramas are the ones that did all the hard work. Comedies were cheap to make. They were turning them out quickly, and they were a way for the studios to make a quick buck.
Yeah. Tami's question is for you, especially because you are the female of the group. So watching certain, I was watching Blue Hawaii. There's some scenes that are you look at the lens of today, are a little rough to watch. First of all, Angela Lansbury in a Southern accent was crazy. Playing Elvis. Whole other story. I mean, you think of Angela Lansbury. I mean, come on, stage and screen, and she's playing, How do you look at how do you reconcile? Because there's some films I can't watch anymore; they're just so bad at this point. But how do you reconcile a lot of the films of that era? We're talking 20s through 60s, where many some 60s too, where females were treated a certain way in film.
There's no reconciling it, James. There isn't. I mean, when you take a look at history and you take a look at the times, which again, as I said, is a reflection of how society viewed gender, race, cultures. It is what it is. And I can scream and rant and rave and say how misogynistic Hollywood is and has been, but I'm not, because it's like reading a history book. You don't like what you see, well then make some changes. Change perspective, change attitudes, change the people who are making the films so you have a more diversified point of view. And those old, I love my horror films. And I love my B horror films, like the really Svengoolie on Saturday night.
Me too.
I am on the couch with my husband and we're watching Svengoolie because we love those cult films.
Yes.
But man, the cast is 10 men, 1 woman, and talk about, oh my, you know what I mean.
I do. No, I do.
You know what I mean. So
yeah. I know. I mean, like I will say this on camera: the old Warner Brothers cartoons I can't watch anymore. My great nephews used to watching it and laughing, which I did too when I was a kid too. But now that I know what I know, they're every phobic. They're everything phobic. I mean, it's just like you can't even pick one. They're like, well, knock out 5 things at once and make it racist and offensive. I mean, it doesn't even matter. And I laugh at that kind of because, it's just hard for me to like, that's a whole other show when it comes to people of color, how they're portrayed, or women, how they're portrayed, people of color, women, people of color, how they're portrayed. I mean, I guess it's a whole other story with that. But maybe one day I'll do a show on that one day. That'd be something interesting. This we're doing, it's kind of weird. But sometimes I have learned to still like certain things. I know there's some things in it, but if I overall like something, I like it still. I guess that's how I look at it. I say I can't look at it I can't look at it with the lens of today. I have to look at it just like it's not as bad. I have Black friends who hate Gone with the Wind. They will not watch it. I understand why. I didn't mind it, of course. I understand why. They all know it's a legendary film, That kind of, and Wizard of Oz had a lot of problems too, behind the scenes. Poor Judy Garland and the Munchkins. So they had issues too. But I do love. What I love about both of your shows. I do like the behind the scenes stories. Because I love Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and the whole behind the scenes story of how that got made is amazing. She had Victoria Price on her show. Legendary Vincent Price, who I grew up with, and of course you hear every Halloween on Thriller,
right?
Which to me, I mean, I want to ask really quick you both about that. I thought it was genius to get Vincent Price rapping basically on a horror song by Michael Jackson. So, Tami, what do you think about that? I mean, overall, it's been out there for now 40 years.
Everything old is new again. And I just really appreciate when, when someone like Michael Jackson has the foresight to think this would be magic. This would be absolutely perfect. Because it's time. Vincent Price is timeless.
Yes.
Classic film is timeless. And so I love those moments where new generations are introduced. Nobody knew who Vincent, the youngins didn't know who Vincent Price was. No. But no, that was great.
Doug, what do you think?
No, I think again, Tim is spot on. I'll give you an example. So I have a 16 and a 12-year-old, and so they were listening to it, and I'm like, "You guys know who that is?" Which I knew they didn't, and I'm like, "Vincent Price," and they're like, "Who's that?" And I said, "Well, I went into this big lecture and blah blah blah," which I'm sure they would sleep on, and then I went back and we pulled up some of his old movies, and I said, "The Fly." Not the new one. We're talking about the old one.
Not the new, not the old blue one.
Yeah. And again, and they're like, I didn't realize. And I'm like, back in the day, this was the man. When it came to horror. Yeah. And I said, but I think Tami's right. Thank goodness that Michael Jackson had that foresight to bring somebody from that generation that's now going to live on forever. And every Halloween, a new generation is going to be introduced to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tami did a great. I mean, Victoria Price was the bomb. It was one of her biggest episodes.
I was jealous. I'm going to say, when I saw that she had him, I was like, oh, damn.
I mean, she was good. And she was so entertaining. Victoria was so self-evasive. She was so entertaining. It's the number one episode of your show. I mean, it's just a huge show. So I just want to get people. Somebody classic. She came to me. We decided to do the show. Part of it's interview, part of it's her. And that was one of her interview shows. And I mean, you have Victoria Price. Can you talk about that a little bit, that interview? Because it was great. I loved it.
Gosh, you know, when you reach out to people for a conversation, it can be, you know, it's hard not to play the mind games. Like, oh no, you know, she'll never respond.
Oh, sorry.
Go
ahead.
But you know, you just got to go for it. And man, when she circled back with the email saying, you know, my schedule's a little crazy, but yeah, I would love to. I was like, she loves her father so much. She loves the fan base so much. There's so much gratitude in her heart. It's such a humbling experience for her. It's just such a beautiful thing to have her be able to carry on her father's passion, her father's legacy, and still maintain her own identity. You know, as we all know, you come from a family where your parent or sibling or what have you is famous. You know, there's struggle in that. But she is just so solid in who she is and can come from a place, again, of just joy and gratitude for the fan base. So it was extraordinary. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a great interview. And one of your biggest shows, Doug, was with Wendy Lou Lee, who played the baby on
Grace
Prairie, and led to my interviews with Karen Grassley and Bottomus Para and all them. And that was a great interview too. I mean, so that's one of your biggest ones. So talk about that too.
Oh yeah, obviously I was very thrilled and excited to have my first celebrity, if you will, and it was pretty early on. I think it was like episode 12 or something. It was really early on, and so I was probably a little shocked and a little tongue-tied to be able to talk to somebody like that. But she was very gracious with her time, answered a lot of our questions, and was gave a lot of insight of behind the scenes, what was going on, what she remembered. Because you have to remember, she was 4 or 5 when she was playing Baby Grace on Little House on the Prairie. And some people don't realize that she has a twin sister. And so they were flipping in and out so they could keep up with the child labor laws, et cetera, et cetera. And she also talked a little bit about Michael Landon and as well. And so really exciting interview. And I was very excited to land somebody like her so early on.
I started from AfterBuzz TV. I loved, they used to send me all the old folks. They always call me send me all the old folks for interviews. And I loved them. And the feeling was kind of like, well, we don't want to do it because we don't know who they are really. You know who they are, James. So give them to you. Then they watch my interviews and go, they're really good. And I would get big numbers. I would get these numbers. So like, because I interviewed people like, I mean, I remember when I interviewed, Timothy Moore, Roger Moore's son. And he was, oh my God, he was hilarious. Oh my God, we laughed so hard about his father. He loved his father, and he has a great sense of humor, being a son of a Bond, and everything, James Bond. And people were like, well, he was great. Well, I got, Ed Asner. I first got Ed Asner, and I had Gloria Laura. I had all these older people were coming to me, and I'm like, they have the best stories, you guys. They have the best stories. They really have the best stories. So I think people need to get over that part and really, you need to hear from them. Now, the gentleman mentioned in the chat room, they're mentioning movies. I'm just going to say these movies out loud to say them. Roman Holiday, A Patch of Blue, Breakfast at Tiffany's, A Place in the Sun, Creature from the Blue Lagoon.
Black Lagoon.
It's a Black Lagoon. I can say Black Lagoon. Sorry, films. It's Black.
Blue Lagoon was with Brooke Shields.
That was
Right.
Brooke Shields. Yeah. You're right. I was like, Blue Lagoon. The original Cat People. Mel says, old women ghost scene in House on Haunted Hill, 1959, is still one of the scariest moments in film. Yes, all those.
Absolutely.
I mentioned films like Harvey. I mentioned films like There are certain films that stuck with me. Them, which is about the giant ants. The original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original one scares the crap out of me. There's certain ones that you're fiercely. Yes, Tammy?
The ending of that film.
I know!
I just saw it
yeah.
recently for the first time. I'd never seen it.
Oh my God.
And I'm watching it, and the ending,
It's creepy. It's creepy.
jaw dropping.
Yes. No, yes. I'm getting chills just thinking about it right now. Because it's a really
Night of the Living Dead.
yes.
Ending.
Yeah.
Jaw dropping.
Which had commentary on society, folks.
Hello.
And commentary on society. You guys know that.
Shocking.
Harvey. I love Harvey. It's my movie. I love Harvey. But there's so many films, and as we're mentioning these ones, I want to ask each of you, what do you feel is the golden age? What time period? What era? Because there's different eras, as you were saying. We have film noir, the 30s, 40s. So, which one of you feels like the golden age is this? I'll let either of you answer when you're ready.
I could go. I still think 1939 is not only the greatest year with films, but it's kind of the gold standard across the board because you have The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Stagecoach came out with John Wayne. There's just so.
Doug.
What's that?
1939, they must have been on something.
Oh, I know.
Because the gold that came out of Hollywood during that year was like, what were they drinking?
And why did they stop drinking? Because
why did they stop?
Because you also had Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Sherlock Holmes comes out that year, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and then you have films that, matter of fact,
right? Hey, wait a minute! You're also mentioning Wuthering Heights, Goodbye, Mr. Chips.
Yep. It was Insane in the Membrane.
You're right. Gulliver's Travels, Love Affair, Jesse James, Hound of the Baskervilles. That was all 1930. Dark Victory with Betty Davis, 1939. Wow. You have to see the women. Come on, it's 39.
And Young Mr. Lincoln with Henry Fonda, 1939. I still think he would have been up and could have won the Academy Award had he had not been up against Gone with the Wind, Mr. Smith Goes to all the great films out there. You have to pick one, and those 5 or 6 come right to the top just because they're such classic money making. But Henry Fonda gives an excellent performance as Abe Lincoln in that year as well. And I think Alexander Graham Bell was also in 1939. There was all kinds of different movies.
Gunga Din, Babes in Arms with Judy Garland, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Son of Frankenstein, Dodge City. I'm going here like The Roaring Twenties with James Cagney. Wow, funny. Another Thin Man, of course. On Borrowed Time with Lionel Barrymore. There's, I'm sitting here. There's like a Bachelor Mother. Eternally Yours. there's so many. Mr. Lincoln. There's so many. Daybreak. The Rules of the Game. There's so many. Wow, you're right. It's 39. Oh, okay.
And I just wanted to say really, really quick, and I'm going to look this up so I don't get it wrong. But I had a gentleman. I think it was like episode 4 or 5 that wrote a book on 1939, and he goes through. A lot of people don't realize that, but there's 365 days in a year, and there was something like 452. I don't remember the exact number. 452 movies that were not B movies, but movies that were coming out, and he goes through each movie that was basically, 3 or 4 per day that was being released. But it was very interesting just to do the research on 1939.
Well, like Terry just said, they were pumping them out. Back then, I remember in the 60s when people would have 3 albums a year. They just right. Number 2 years. They're just like, hey, keep it going. And somebody slow down. So Tammy, what do you think is the golden age?
Well, and Doug, maybe you know the answer to this, because I know when people give the decades of classic film, there's no definitive, well, it's from this year to this year. It's kind of a sliding scale. Golden age, it seems so subjective.
Yes.
In my brain. So I really can't
Okay.
answer that, because to me, classic film.
That's a good question. What do you think is classic? What's considered classic?
Yeah. I mean, I'm dating myself, but classic film to me should technically move into the 70s.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Because the films of the 70s broke the mold. The studios were gone, and it was back to, this like getting a camera and getting in a car. It was it was so gritty, and so yeah, I'd move it up to the 70s. And you know what? I love me my John Hughes films. So let's move it into the 80s.
The 80s.
I'm right there with you.
Well, I clearly I do too. I mean, clearly. I mean, when he passed away, I was really sad, actually. Like my teenage years just died. It was like, that was an era also. It's much to unpack. I'm telling you, just so many things I want to unpack. All right, well, number one, I want to say, so we have a new show coming on JLJ Media. It's my chance to promote this in this kind of genre. It's called Have You Heard Me? Have you heard of me? And it's going to start from the 70s on, picking films and actors who are just never mentioned. I always call it passing down. I always say that there's certain films that are passed down. Wizard of Oz is one of them. It's always passed down to generation. Then there are films start. And you're like, they were great. They were big at that time. Why did they get passed down? Willy Wonka got passed down. But like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, not really. It didn't really got passed down. Or Bedknobs and Broomsticks, my favorite movies with Jodie Foster, didn't really get passed down. But Dr. Dolittle got passed down. Like you say, it's interesting which ones do and which ones don't.
Yeah.
Not to mention Urban Cowboy. Now you're really going to the 80s. But like certain films, like Rocky got passed down, where 10 films that year that came out were just as good. Don't. Saturday Night Fever got passed down.
Well, you're talking about the 70s. So like The Godfather obviously got passed down. The Godfather 1, 2, obviously. But, I think of a film with like The French Connection. That was a great film.
Best
but
part they've seen ever.
Yeah.
Best part they've seen ever.
But, with Gene Hackman, of course, he won the Academy Award for that. But I think that film's kind of overlooked and didn't get passed down and given the due credit that I think it deserves.
I completely agree.
So can I just, when we're talking about 1939, one of my favorite years is 1968. And it all started with the Thomas Crown Affair. And even the music, I can tell when a film's from 1968, 1967, because the music is so iconic. Like, I don't know if the composer was just doing all the films for all. But I'm looking.
Sign me up.
I'm looking at 1968, and there's Bullet, there's Romeo and Juliet, The Odd Couple, Funny Girl,
iconic,
Barbarella.
Yeah. Barbarella, Duran Duran.
Yeah.
That's where it came
1968. Wow.
Well, Tami, it's funny you say that because there's a book on the films of 1967 that I read for Oscars, because it was In the Heat of the Night, it was Valley of the Dolls, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Cool Hand Luke,
Love that film.
The Graduates, The Producers, Casino Royale. I mean, like, that was another one of those years. But you're right. It's like, well, see, late 60s is my time period. Late 60s to early 70s, TV, movies, music. I'm into, like, my mother, I was born during that time period, and my mother, the earliest memories, we had talked about this the other show the other day, Doug, where those are my earliest memories are Jesus Christ Superstar, Peter, Paul and Mary, Hair, I remember, Tommy. I remember all these things when I was a kid that my mother would play in the background, and didn't, back then they didn't care since kids were doing, it was the 70s, they didn't care. So I'd see things I probably should have seen. Like I said, Barbarella, I remember the opening scene of Jane Fonda floating in space and getting dressed or whatever. The whole thing. And so when Duran Duran came out later in the 80s, I knew where that came from. Like Duran Duran, like that's from Barbarella. But just like that time period for me is a very sacred time period for me, and gives me a feeling back to what Tam was saying earlier. You hear it, it's familiar. All the music sounds, it's different music, folks, but just like it sounds of that time. It's almost like disco. later disco, it could be anybody singing it, but you know it's disco or new wave. Anything, you know, whether it's Depeche Mode or your Rhythmics or anything, it's still, when you hear an 80s song, you know it's the 80s.
That's
When
right.
you hear a 60s, when you hear a 60s song, whether it's Burt Bacharach and Dionne Warwick, or whether it's Motown, you know it's the 60s. So I go with Tammy. There's a feeling with the films too. They all had a certain sheen to them of that era, and it probably was some of the same people doing some of the music, some of the same people doing the cinematography, some of the same people doing the direction, because they, you know, was as many people as there are now. So who knows, Tammy? Maybe something to it. I mentioned Bonnie and Clyde. Yes, was not passed down properly. Gaslight. Yes, love that. Yes, no. I mean, anything Hitchcock, I'm all in anyway. Just anything, because my favorite is Vertigo. Vertigo, because I'm from San Francisco. Vertigo is my with an early Miss Ellie from Dallas, Barbara Bel Geddes, who played the secretary. But no, I love Kim Novak was one of those kind of noir-esque actresses. I mean, there's so much about classic film that people don't realize that it's a gold mine. It's a treasure trove of stuff that you can enjoy still today. They hold up, right? They still hold up, don't they? So
go
ahead, Doug. Please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say absolutely. And sometimes I would rather watch some of the older movies than I would some of the newer stuff out today, just because. One, I always tell my wife, I'm doing research, babe. I got to watch this movie.
It's a write-off.
Part of my job. Yeah.
Yes, it's so funny. So in our last like 5-10 minutes, I want to make sure I bring this up, because you both have successful series on my network, and I want to say to Doug first, because Doug's series is huge. It's exploded into one of my top 3-4 shows of my network, which is crazy. We told this before. I know you're surprised. I mean, we didn't see this coming, did we? We didn't.
No,
not at all. So it must be pleasing to know that a thought and idea that you came up with about a subject that is evergreen. When you think about it, it's evergreen. Is working for you, isn't it? To you, Doug.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And, I want to say that with the success of the show, obviously, thank you to James for agreeing to go with this crazy idea. But I also want to say thank you to Tammy as well, because I don't know if you remember this, Tammy, but we were emailing back and forth very early on in this process, and you helped me shape the format of how it was going to go. So those that are not familiar, I always do the Turner Classic Star of the Month. So Turner Classic Movie Star of the Month. And then I do a theme. I also do a book review about a particular star, producer, etc. And then I have a forgotten star. And I have to say, a lot of that came from Tammy. So thank you publicly. So again, the
Thank you
success
for doing it so well.
Well, I don't know about that, but that's up for debate. But I have to thank both of you, and it's just not anything that I've done. It's not just me. It's obviously taken the whole team to be able to have any success at all. So thank you guys.
I love hearing that. That's what JLJMedia is about. We help each other. And
Absolutely.
Tammy, so it's funny how Tammy's an interesting situation, because she did 12 episodes, and she hasn't done it in a while, since October of last year. And then I started seeing, all of a sudden, the show started going up and up and up in November. It did record numbers in December. It did some numbers in January. And now we're in February, and it's already last week was the top 20 of my show. I keep telling you, the show is doing it's doing well, almost like doing well. How does that feel?
It feels amazing. I mean, again, I think what feels the most wonderful is the fact that there are people listening to stuff about classic Hollywood. It's not just something like a classic, or it's not just forgotten Hollywood. It's like there are people who are actually interested, and they click and they listen to the audio, or they watch an interview, because they have an interest. And it's kind of nerdy. I mean, I feel like Doug and I are really nerds.
Right, I agree.
Really, like, we could go on and on and on and
Right.
on. This could be like a 5-hour show.
Right.
But when we introduce just one person to a film or some trivia, and you see their eyes light up and their interest is piqued, it's like, yes, yes.
There is. No, you're
Spread
right.
the word, spread it.
It's an area that I grew up with, and I'm an old person, so I like it. But I never thought about having that on my network. And coming from AfterBuzz TV, coming from After Party Radio, where they didn't do that kind of stuff, and they were not as open about this kind of stuff as I am. So I'm like, sure, let's try something. I don't know, let's try it. There's an audience for everything.
Yeah.
That's what I'm learning. I'm learning that I'm having the most interesting success in areas that I just didn't know. But there's an audience, especially now, I think, and you guys may agree with me, because of this whole pandemic. People are either having to be at home more, or they're looking to escape more. And the new stuff isn't I want to say as good, I guess, or as satisfying. I'll say that, as satisfying. Because there are some new stuff that's really good too, but it's not as satisfying as going to the familiar, and that is usually the older stuff. I think both your shows complete, and some of the after I do like the Knots Landing after show. I do the Down, and they're getting huge numbers. People are just like, they want the nostalgia. And I've learned a lot. I have with your shows, and I've learned a lot about that. There's an audience, and I feel like my demographic is there for you guys. Also, I have an older audience because of the Hallmark Channel stuff, the soaps. It's all there, and people are chattering. A Texas Rangers fan. I loved watching Robert Osborne.
Oh,
There's people. I remember Saturday afternoons, watching Abbott and Costello and watching the Three Stooges and all that stuff, and it was classic. It was, for me, it was my classic stuff. I mean, they said own your nerdiness. That's their films. But I mean, that's stuff that I remember. And I said, watching Elvira and her, whatever she's doing, and they're all 98% of the new stuff is Marvel. Yeah, that's true.
Well,
that is. But even classic Superman.
Exactly.
George Reeves. We're now with the Bob too.
well, I'll tell you something I think is even amazing as well. For me, and Tammy, I don't know if you're seeing this as well, but success overseas. It's just not here in the States, but it's over in Norway, it's in the Netherlands, it's in Japan, it's in Australia, or Great Britain, or wherever. And I'm like, I don't know anybody over there, but people are picking that up and they're listening. And so that makes me feel good too. It's just not here in the States that we're really reaching an international audience. And I learned when I was interviewing Winnie Lee that they have a big following of Little House on the Prairie in France. That was eye-opening to me. And yeah, and so it's been really interesting for me, and to know that, kind of international success, if you will, is really surprising, but also kind of humbling too, to think that somebody somewhere else is listening to what we're doing. So
you both are international. I mean, all our shows are international.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing. When we put something out, it goes
Right.
everywhere. People forget it goes all over the world. So when I get these charts, and so I'm like, oh, we're big in Hungary. Okay, sure, why not?
Yeah.
We're big in Albania. We know from the soaps, look at people from France and from Spain and from Italy, because some of these soaps are sold internationally, and like it's a big small world. And America has always been the mecca for film. Other places have film too, but they all admit to make it in America, that was the place to really make it. And American films went out. They still do. And that's just kind of something. We're not the only place. There's other places too, do great films, but just we've always, especially with classic films, we were the ones who are pumping it out. Like Tammy said, they're just pumping them out. The amount of work that's come out from the 30s to the 70s, I would think, or 80s. We had a lot of work that went out to the world. A lot of work we did. Phil. Oh, yes, they may. So I mean, we're going to end the show. But I want to thank you both publicly for both your shows, for believing in JLJ Media and actually having a show on my network. And Forgotten Hollywood is every Monday, and it's just this huge giant hit we have. And somebody classic, one day, so may have some new episodes here and there coming later in the year, right? Something may come up.
Absolutely.
Or specials or something. The show is not dead, like the films are never dead. So the show's classic. The show's classic. So you never know. And our new series, Have You Heard of Me, will be coming soon. The first introduction episode just came out today. But they're all part of this classic Hollywood mindset that we love. We want to continue and pass it. We want to pass it on down. That's what we're going to do. We're passing it on down to future generations. So I know that there's a Forgotten Hollywood page on Facebook. It's a Like It Classic on all social media platforms. So just go there and follow us anyway. And of course, follow Doug at He's Doug 14 and Tami at Tami.Goveia on Instagram and Tami Goveia everywhere else. Where can you follow me? We're all JLJ Jr.'s sold at Lott Jr. and all social media platforms. That's right. You can find me there. I'm a little sold out these days. I'm tired, but you'll buy me at some points. Thank you guys. Thank you everybody out there. Thank you everybody in the chat room. You guys came on and watched. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
We really appreciate it. I love doing this. It's a lot of work, but I love doing this. I love having people on my network.